iPredict works by gathering the knowledge of its 5,000 plus traders. If a stock has a price of 57 cents, that means the market thinks that event has a 57% chance of happening. If you agree, you buy. If you disagree, you short. And if you're right, you make money. Kia ora, good evening in New Zealand. This is day 27 until the country goes to the polls. Welcome to iPredict Election 2011, the most accurate source of political and economic information in New Zealand broadcasting. Our three predictions tonight. Prediction 1. iPredict is saying there is a 10% chance of Phil Goff becoming Prime Minister. While that sounds terribly low, that is the highest he has been since July, and market sentiment changed most after the opening addresses on Friday. Prediction 2. iPredict is saying the National Party vote will be 46%. The latest mainstream media landline polls are claiming 53.3%. Can National really govern alone? Prediction 3. iPredict is predicting 1.65% growth to the end of March 2012, while Treasury has predicted 2.3% growth. What are the political ramifications of much less growth than Bill English is banking on? To dissect these predictions, let me introduce tonight's panel. She is one of the best bloggers in New Zealand from the University of Auckland Film, Television and Media Studies Department, Phoebe Fletcher. And he is one of the greats of the left-wing Politburo, columnist, author, political commentator and part-time folk singer, Comrade Chris Trotter. Welcome to you both. We'll also wrap the show with a final prediction, but let's kick things off with tonight's first market prediction. Phil Goff's chances of being Prime Minister was given a kickstart after the opening party addresses. Chris, what was your take on National's opening party address compared to Labour's opening party address?
Well, I thought the National Party effort was distinctly below par. I suspect what they were trying to do, Martin, was replicate that town hall meeting approach to elections which they've perfected in the United States. I mean, Bill Clinton, made a huge advance in his opinion poll standings when he came down from the podium and approached the audience and uttered those immortal words, "I feel your pain."
Right.
And, that's very effective television, but I think it's fair to say that in the United States they invest a little more in lighting, so you can actually see the audience, and it's real in the sense that although the questions may have been filtered through a journalistic panel, they are nevertheless questions from real people, whereas it was pretty clear pretty soon that National's questions were, carefully constructed to show John Kioff in the best light. And of course, from National's perspective, they've seen the Prime Minister performing live, extempore, at any number of breakfast meetings and lunches and formal dinners and so forth, where he is very good at that off-the-cuff, kind of folksy, kind of jokesy way of speaking. And people come out of those events going, God, that guy's amazing. And I think that's what they were hoping for, but it just didn't work.
Compared to Labour's?
Well, Labour took a completely different approach, a very, very interesting approach. What it needed to do was settle and reassure its base.
Right.
For several months, I think Labour has been losing the confidence and the faith of its electoral base. So Dan Salmon, the guy who put it together, and he deserves a tremendous amount of credit, because what he did was remind people of what the Labour Party was, of where it came from, of what it stood for. He reintroduced us to the pantheon of Labour heroes, Mickey Savage, Peter Fraser, Walter Nash.
It was a history lesson, wasn't it? Short
and of course, this is important because there's a generation of New Zealanders who by and large didn't know this. They had no idea.
Most of
really.
The journalist pool don't seem to know it either.
Yes, far be it from me to heap scorn upon my colleagues, but this was a very important piece of work from the Labour Party because it did settle its base. It was very clear, I'm told from Twitter, but I followed the comments on blogs like The Standard, and it was crystal clear that people felt a surge of pride in the party. They were saying, this is what we always thought Labour was about. It's so great to see this. And, you know, when they started placing Phil Goff and David Cunliffe and some of their younger people like Jacinda Ardern and Grant Robertson, they framed it in a very clever way. We saw Phil sitting beside his 87-year-old dad, talking about the privations of life in the 20s and 30s. You saw, I thought most tellingly of all, Jacinda Ardern and Murupara. The imagery there was very stark. Old, probably uninhabited now, state houses covered in graffiti. This was once a thriving forestry town. And what Labor also did, and I think this was particularly important for the base, was that it embraced the reality of Rogernomics. It showed, you know, the fisticuffs at the Auckland Regional Conference, the famous moment where it all just disintegrated. And they haven't been very good at doing this. They've been trying to sort of gloss over Rogernomics, but they took it head on this time. And I think at the end of it, listening to the Labour leaders of today, with that sort of echo in the viewers' ears of the past, you came to the end of that, and there was, you know, for those who are of a left-wing persuasion, centre-left and heading lefter, there was a kind of warm glow. There was a sense of, wow, yeah, that's what we're about. And clearly the market responded to this.
Phoebe, commentators have noted how stiff Key's performance was, but have the electorate already made their mind up to support Key regardless of how poorly he performs over the next 4 weeks?
I think that's a tough one, and that I certainly agree with Chris. There has been a decision to run a presidential style campaign. He has always been riding very, very high in the leadership polls, and we have also seen him kind of, come out with interviews with Richie McCaw, and of course we saw him with Peter Jackson at Hobbartown on the news the other night. I think that the media has pinged back from the rugby, where we had, virtually it was Dan Carter's crotch, to a sole focus on politics. And I think Labor have actually, by not launching, done something quite clever here, because they've pulled the focus back entirely to policy. And I think this is, perhaps one of John Key's weakness. I mean, I certainly agree with Chris Trotter in terms of the lighting. He looked like the fool guy in a film noir. Every time there was a side shot, as Public Address said, here we have a fake Prime Minister in front of a fake public meeting. With a fake audience asking fake questions. But it did not come across well in terms of the way that it lined up against Labor. Labor had, something very savvy, and in fact something very modern as well. I mean, in some ways it reminded me of an episode of Eating Media Lunch, the way that it was cut together. It had a kind of element of satire. I don't think that they did deal that well with the 1984 Labor government. To me, they kind of glossed over that a little bit. But what they did was they actually constructed a narrative, whereas Key appeared just so stiff, and he was just talking about crime, keeping interest rates down, and there wasn't really the kind of appeal around it that he has created before. But I do think that voters will have largely have made up their mind by this point, but I think that there is a bit of room to manoeuvre, and the fact that we're seeing this going up in the iPredict polls in terms of Goff's performance, I mean, all the commentators, the feedback even from people like Bill Ralston has been that, that was Labor's night, the opening addresses.
Question to both of you. Labor's bold opening address kind of made the Greens' opening address look limp in comparison. Are the Greens trying to be more lime than green to appeal to National Party swing voters? Is that where they're at?
Well, yes, it did suffer by comparison. It was a different kind of party political broadcast. It was a much more conventional kind of party political broadcast, with the two leaders moving towards the camera, being all friendly and smiling a lot. And any other time, against any other preceding piece, it would have been a very slick, but it's very slickness against all those newsreels from the 1930s and 40s, which always convey, I mean, black and white sort of means history almost to most people, and it has a very credible feel to it, those wonderful stentorian narrations they always accompany those newsreels with. Whereas Materia and Russell, it was conversational, and it was fine, except next to that. Next to that, you're right, it looked a bit contrived, a little short on vision, which was strange because, you know, the Greens are supposed to have the monopoly on vision.
That's right.
And it must have been a rude shock to them, I think, because the Greens have grown up sort of in the shadow of Labour as a neoliberal party. And so, as a neoliberal party, Labour's old visionary elements were kept, you know, well out of sight. But what that opening broadcast did was bring them all back into the foreground. I was half expecting them to refer to each other as comrade, you know. And suddenly the Greens, by sort of trying to look, you know, acceptable in a kind of neoliberal world, you know, suddenly suffered by the comparison with Labour's traditionalism.
Have the Greens misread the zeitgeist? Have they zigged when they should have zagged?
I don't think the Greens have misread the zeitgeist, and I think their ad was nowhere near as bad as ACT's banjo rendition of the New Zealand national anthem and constant reference to patriots.
That was
I agree with Chris. It was tough to measure up against that really strong documentary-styled creation of a narrative that Labour had. I mean, what's been really interesting too in the minor leaders debates, I think the Greens have done incredibly well, and you know, we've had people like Bill English come out over the last week and say that we do believe, you know, flirting, we do believe that, you know, you guys are worth at least 10% in the polls. So there is quite a lot of, you know, flirtation going on there. But in terms of the minor leader debates that have led up to this, there is a kind of grapple going on where everyone just keeps nicking the Greens' policies, you know. Like, so, for example, you know, John Key stole the housing installation on the Native Affairs debate.
That's right.
And then you ended up, at the end of that, when all the minor parties came on, so we had Winston, Matiria, and so on, you ended up with them all in agreement, okay, where Julian Wilcox was saying, here is the coalition, you guys all belong together. And I don't know if they actually really pushed forward their points of difference, because they are very good on the economy and they have been good at getting a message through, and certainly this is something that I think is being picked up by voters, but I don't know whether the ad reflected that so strongly.
Final question to both of you. Phil Goff, 10% chance of being Prime Minister. Would you buy that stock because he has a much higher chance of winning, or short that stock because there's no way he'll be the Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, I would probably buy Phil's stock at the moment. I mean, what the movement in the market indicates is just how volatile political markets are. And the fact that it can move so decisively in response to a single opening broadcast indicates this volatility. And taking the poll on Television 3, which shows a narrowing, I think if you were, you know, going to invest, you'd be wise to invest in Labour stock now, at least for a little while, because I think the return is going to be pretty good over the next fortnight anyway.
Would you buy that stock or short that stock?
I think we're probably still going to have a National Party government, but I think at that price, 10 cents, why not buy? And I think, you know, the other really interesting thing, you know, beginning tonight and of course over the course of this week is going to be the leaders debates, where I think that Goff will actually, you know, he has got a lot more political experience than Key. He's very good on policy, and we may see him kind of pull out the punches a little bit further.
And of course, if he does well tonight, he won't
We'll
be
see
at 10,
that
he won't
stock,
be at
that's
10
right.
cents tomorrow morning.
Thank you, panel. Let's move on to prediction 2. iPredict are predicting the National Party vote will be 46%. The latest landline polls claim 53.3%. Chris Muldoon got 48% in 1975. Longy got 48% in 1987. Bolger got 48% in 1990. Will National beat their 2008 45%?
Well, in each of those cases, it was a moment of government change, and you usually see an ebbing of the tide, as it were, from that high point. Although in the case of Longy, that may have been the 87 win, which was a little aberrant compared to other New Zealand election victories. I think 46 is a realistic figure, but It's also a figure I'd be very concerned about were I in the National Party, because that's not enough to win.
Right. Phoebe, the landline polls last year claimed Banks and Brown were neck and neck when Brown thrashed Banks. The landline poll for the Tito Tokoro by-election claimed Hone was ahead by only 1% when he won by over 9%. The iPredict market is saying 46% for National. Can National govern alone?
I don't think that they can. I think that they're going to need the Māori Party, and I think that we're already beginning to see that kind of coalition being set up now. I mean, we had that distinction in the minor leaders debates where we had, a very distinct differentiation going on, where Peter Sharples was saying, no, we are, pro-partial privatisation of assets.
That's right.
I think that, there's certainly, in terms of Key's latest comments, there has been a recognition that this is going to be a closer fight than they thought it was going to be just a month ago. So I think that, again, with what Chris said before, the volatility is really here, in terms of what might happen over the next few weeks. I think that they will still be kind of polling in that sort of range.
Question to both of you. If the landline polls are wrong and National aren't in a position to be a majority government, who can they form a coalition with?
Well, I think the really exciting prospect, from a journalistic point of view anyway, in relation to the election result, will be if we see a situation develop where the Greens could possibly, by throwing their lot in with a multi-party coalition, just get the numbers on the floor of the House to allow Phil to form a government.
Yep.
But equally, by throwing in their lot with the National Party,
Sure.
produce an extremely stable government. I think Russell Norman and Materia Ture at that point will come under the most enormous pressure. They'll come under pressure because National will be a long way ahead of Labour in terms of its vote. It'll be in the 40s, whereas Labour is highly likely to be in the 30s and probably the low 30s, mid-30s. And the news media will rightly point out that ever since we've had MMP, the government which has been formed by the party that got the largest number of votes. So there'll be that pressure on Russell. There'll be the pressure that will come on him from people who point to the economic situation, which iPredict is certainly saying is far less rosy than Treasury is predicting. They'll be saying New Zealand cannot afford to have a government dependent on the likes of Hone Harawira or perhaps Winston Peters. Plus, the Greens, plus the Labour Party, it would be far more credible to overseas investors, credit rating agencies, if we had, a blue-green coalition with a substantial majority in the House and the ability to go ahead and make decisions without looking over its shoulder all the time. Now, poor Russell, poor Materia, because that sort of pressure will be unprecedented in New Zealand, because we won't have seen anything like it before, because before people have always gone with the majority party. Even Winston, who kept everyone waiting all those years ago, still went with National. That won the largest number of votes.
Do you think Green Party voters would be horrified if they got into bed with John Key?
Oh, I think there is certainly that element there. I mean, Catherine Delahunty has already said that she will resign if that takes place.
Right.
And I think that there is a lot of tension that is going on within the Greens internally discussing that at the moment. And I would say that in terms of the way that they've positioned themselves and postured in the minor leader debates, I actually think that's looking less likely. Even though 66% of National voters would welcome that Greens coalition. But in terms of the polls, what is the really interesting thing at the moment is whether we get the, and this is one thing that iPredict is telling us as well, is whether we get Winston in for New Zealand First and whether ACT make it through.
Yes.
I mean, we're seeing ACT a little bit more up in the polls in Epsom, but, leading up to this, we've had Paul Goldsmith at 37% on the polls,
right.
and a very minimal party vote for ACT.
Yes.
So there is a kind of slim chance at the moment that ACT could drop off. It's going to be very close and very fine, and that also is going to kind of place pressure on
Final
the
question to both of you.
coalition.
National at 46% party vote, would you buy that stock because you think it'll go higher, or would you short that stock because you think it'll go lower?
Oh, I think at this stage I'd go short on National.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, just once again, seeing the gap between the centre-left and the centre-right narrowing. Really, it's only going to require a 4 or 5 percentage point shift on the basis of iPredict's figures, perhaps even less than that, to see a change of government. And I've always said, if Winston Peters walks back into Parliament, then John Key will walk out of the beehive.
Would you buy that stock? Would you short it?
Short. I mean, if it was me, I'd probably have stocks on both. Just like the sort of person I am.
Sounds like the perfect market requirements there. Thank you, panel. Moving on to prediction 3. iPredict are predicting the economic growth will be far lower than that predicted by Treasury. Chris, what are the political ramifications if we have less growth in New Zealand? Does this become the justification to sell the remaining 51% of assets?
Well, I mean, the Treasury's previous statement was generally received by most economists as woefully optimistic.
Right.
Unhelpfully
optimistic.
Optimistic. And it does make me wonder anyway, about Treasury's intellectual and professional integrity, because you do get the impression sometimes that they're tailoring their numbers to suit the government of the day, and they shouldn't do that. They should be ruthlessly honest, not only with governments but with the public. I mean, that's what they're paid to do, as far as I can see. So I don't think economists, I don't think business believes Treasury. And I think that's reflected by iPredict's numbers, which are well short of the Treasury prediction, and line up with the not necessarily the worst case, but the downside scenario that the Treasury put forward.
Phoebe, better economic management than Labour is a pillar of the National Party pitch to voters. With an $18 billion deficit blowout and credit downgrade, how's National doing with that line?
I guess, same as Chris here, that there is a lot of volatility in that market, and I do agree, we've got economists like Gareth Morgan that are saying that actually we're really floating on commodities at the moment. If you look at what's going on in the Eurozone, it has really been reported in New Zealand as, the solution that would solve everything, whereas if you read international economics magazines, they're saying actually we're still not very much out of the woods. We've had Italy and Spain dumping stocks, we've given 9 months to recapitalise banks, and, that really kind of puts the economy at risk. I think that Labour have done quite a risky move here in raising the retirement age to 67, and that really is a pitch, I suppose, to be seen as a kind of, serious player on that front. The criticism of that National has always pitched at them that this, blowout from the global financial crisis is both that, but it's also Labour's fault in terms of how much Cullen was spending before. I think that, they've pitched this to be seen as serious economic players. Although I would say that it would depend on who they went into coalition with as to whether that actually went through.
Question to both of you. From 2008, Treasury claimed we would get 1.5% growth, 2.3% growth, and then 3.2% growth. We actually got negative 1.1% growth, negative 0.4% growth, and negative 0.1% growth. Is this recession beyond Treasury's ability to predict?
Or beyond the willingness of Treasury to arm the government's opponents, as I say, getting back to that earlier observation about some of their predictions. I mean, in the very short term, and we are talking about 27 days after all, I'm not sure whether these numbers matter that much, except perhaps if the economists out there are less willing to sing the praises of the government, and perhaps a little more willing, given the stand on superannuation, given the stand on KiwiSaver, given the stand on capital gains tax, which I think a lot of people in the business community secretly quite admire in terms of their gutsiness and willingness to break the two-party hoodoo that these things cannot be even discussed. So if that tempers, if that reduces the attacks on Labour from credible economic sources, then perhaps it will have a small...
Treasury out of the depth on this?
mean, they hardly ever get stuff right. But, you know, like Chris says, I don't really think that it's going to drastically affect the election in the next 3 weeks, because the thing is that most people have already made their decision on whether they believe that, you know, supporting businesses is going to promote growth, or whether they believe that, you know, we've had this kind of extreme free market mentality, and that, you know, the ping back is too hard. And I also think that, you know, in terms of television, radio and so on, who that's aimed at, that is aimed at an ideal viewer that has got disposable income, which is not really the people that are hurting. So I think, you know, we really have to look at the longer term focus on that. I don't know if it's going to swing the election that heavily.
Still 40%, let's not forget this, 40% roughly of the population is very, very fickle. It's really only about 60% that are set in their ways, that have made up their mind about who they're going to vote for. So, you know, these small things can make a difference.
Final question, both of you. Treasury are forecasting 2.3% growth for the year ending March 2012. iPredict are predicting only 1.65% growth. Would you buy that because growth will be that low, or short it because Treasury are right, will all be rolling in GDP?
No, I think I would go with iPrediction.
Yep.
Yeah, I would buy the iPredict stocks on that one.
Thank you, panel. Let's wrap the show with final prediction. Chris, your final prediction for tonight is?
I would predict that tomorrow Winston Peters will announce that he is not going to stand in any electorate.
What a big prediction.
Ooh,
big
that is a big prediction.
Phoebe, your final prediction?
Oh, my prediction would be on ACT. Keep watching that. It's going to be so close. There is an opportunity, of course, for Labor Party voters that are in Epsom to vote for Goldsmith to get rid of ACT.
Wouldn't that be crazy?
You know, that is the one to watch at the moment.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Phoebe. To my final prediction, if National cannot win an outright majority, the question then becomes, who could they go into coalition with? ACT look terrible in Epsom. Peter Dunn will be a close call. And the Māori Party face vote splitting in their war with Mana. This election could be far closer than the mainstream media are predicting, and much closer to iPredict's numbers. Tomorrow night, I'm joined by NBR columnist Matthew Hooton and Auckland Central Labour Party candidate Jacinda Ardern. Follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook accounts for all my latest election updates. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for iPredict Election 2011, exclusively on Stratus TV. Until then, get trading.